Thank you very much, Murray, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to, at the top, before taking your questions, I'd like to read just some excerpts of the speech I intended to give this morning in the CD plenary. Unfortunately, because of the decision that was made by the Maduro regime representative to not allow other statements to take place early on in the session, I decided that I could not in any way legitimize that presidency by staying in the room and waiting. So if you don't mind, if you wouldn't mind if I take just a few minutes and read you a few of the excerpts from my statement, which we have available to give to you. I think we have them right now and we can circulate them. But I just wanted to read a few, I think, key points from the speech that I plan to give this morning. So I'll just take a few moments. As many of you may recall, in 2018, I took the floor to announce that, quote, based on Syria's repeated attempts to use its presidency of the Conference on Disarmament to normalize the regime and its unacceptable and dangerous behavior, the United States will not participate in the Syrian-led plenary, unquote. It simply is unfathomable that the body which negotiated the Chemical Weapons Convention would tolerate a presidency by a regime that uses chemical weapons against its own people. And yet here we are again, less than 1 year later, facing another profound CD leadership crisis as we are confronted with yet another illegitimate presidency presiding over this body. Because the United States continues to see value in the Conference on Disarmament and remains committed to its potential, we are again compelled to take a principled stand in support of this august body's noble ideals. The United States therefore condemns in the strongest terms Venezuela's presidency of this body, while it is represented by members of the illegitimate Maduro regime. As such, we will boycott the CD for the next 4 weeks, the duration of Venezuela's presidency. Let me be clear about what is at stake. The Maduro regime stole an election from the Venezuelan people, bankrupted the country's economy, created the second largest refugee and migration crisis in the world, and denied Venezuelans the humanitarian supplies they so desperately need. The United States and other countries that value freedom and share a commitment to the goals and mandate of the CD have a moral obligation to support the Venezuelan people as they strive to reclaim their democracy, uphold their constitution, and maintain their sovereignty. We must support Interim President Juan Guaido in the National Assembly and support his representative in Switzerland as she seeks to assume her rightful place within the Conference on Disarmament. The walkout by the Lima Group, the United States, and other responsible nations during high-level week in February this year was in direct response to the Maduro regime's representation in the CD and sent a strong message to the Venezuelan people and to the world regarding our joint commitment to liberty and the rule of law. And lastly, the United States unequivocally deplores the unconscionable acts carried out under the Maduro regime in Venezuela. History has shown that a regime that oppresses its people and blatantly disregards the rule of law at home has contempt for international obligations and norms. The CD cannot move forward when held captive under the yoke of illegitimate leadership. We look forward to working with members of Interim President Juan Guaido's team in the future as we seek to build upon the CD's impressive legacy, reasserting its relevancy so that it can yet again tackle compelling security challenges. So those were just some excerpts of my statement that I wanted to read to you all. I'm right now very happy to take your questions. Yes.
Good morning. Well, you've made a strong statement by walking out of the CD, but is it perhaps not counterproductive? You're staying away for 4 weeks. I mean, how does silence help the situation in any way? Isn't there an argument for your being present and arguing, perhaps, or presenting the United States position and why you are so opposed to what you call the illegitimate presidency of the Venezuelan government?
Thank you for your question. I have on a number of occasions in the CD made clear my opposition to the Maduro regime taking that seat in the CD. What we understand the Maduro regime has planned for the 4 weeks is basically just propaganda. They're just trying to, in essence, paint their regime as undertaking a normal presidency as any other CD president. And that we just cannot tolerate. And we don't think being in the room is a good way to make clear how illegitimate we see that regime. By staying in that room, we are basically, I think, going against everything we believe. And we just cannot imagine, as with the Syrian presidency, that we could remain seated in that room, having that CD discussion being presided over by such an illegitimate regime. And so we don't believe we're missing anything. The Lima Group countries decided to boycott the presidency of the Maduro regime as well. A number of countries have downgraded their representation in that body during the 4 weeks of Venezuela's presidency. So we think we're sending a very powerful message, not just to CD representatives in the room, but to the Venezuelan people, that we are standing with them and we are not going to give any credibility or legitimacy to this regime as it occupies the CD presidency.
Just a quick follow-up, and that is the Lima Group, how many countries are these? I mean, how wide is your support in terms of staying away from the CD? Are there other countries, many other countries that will be doing the same?
Yeah, I don't have the list of countries right in hand, but the Lima Group has, I'm trying to give you a good count. I don't want to give you a number that's incorrect, but it's a good group of countries that decided during the last week of the U.S. presidency. It was 12, thank you. 12 Lima Group countries. You have, you had at last week's U.S. presidency, the Lima Group made a statement making very clear that they would not take part at any point during Venezuela's presidency. And you have other countries, as I said, who decided to downgrade their representation, and some countries that just did not show up at all outside of the Lima Group. So I think I didn't have a good opportunity as I was walking out this morning to take a good look, but I did hear from colleagues and some others that the room was fairly empty. In fact, with you guys not in the room, there was even, it looked even smaller in terms of attendance. So there's a lot of opposition to that regime holding this presidency. And again, as I said, they're trying to play it as if everything is normal. They are just another country conducting a presidency, and they claim that they have some activities that they want to undertake. But they're doing this just to try to paint themselves as legitimate, and we cannot allow that to happen. And we will continue to point out how illegitimate this presidency is going forward, and will not give it not one iota of credibility from our perspective. Thank you.
Yes, good morning. I'm a bit puzzled by the decision, with all due respect. I mean, you mentioned Syria. There is a clear link between the Syrian presidency and the CD because they used chemical weapons, right? Well, allegedly. Now the link is more thin regarding Maduro. I mean, I understand your position on this government, considered as illegitimate, but could you please explain to me why using the CD, the Conference on Disarmament, to basically pass your message on the Maduro regime? There is nothing to do with disarmament from my point of view. Thank you.
No, thank you for your question. It's not just the CD. You're seeing this in other international fora where representatives of governments are walking out when representatives of the Maduro regime are speaking or engaging. So it's not just the CD where you see this type of activity taking part. From the U.S. government perspective, our opposition is quite clear. We do not believe that malign actors, countries such, or regimes such as Maduro's, should have the right to accede to leadership positions in international fora. This is a clear American position. There are a number of other countries, particularly within the Lima Group, they view this the same way. And so it's not just the CD. There were protestations, as you remember, a walkout during the Human Rights Council session earlier this year. We know there's been some activity at the World Health Assembly. You see this in a number of places, at the OAS, in headquarters in Washington. So it's not just the CD. But what I think it shows is that the Maduro regime cannot escape censure, will not be able to run away from other countries expressing their strong views about the illegitimacy of that regime. And so I think you're going to see more of this in other fora. And because very simply, this is a regime that's reprehensible and that the international community in many quarters has said enough is enough. We are not going to participate in fora where Venezuela, the Maduro regime, is being represented.
Rapidly. Okay, thank you for the explanation. Now I have a follow-up, meaning the broader picture. I mean, okay, I understand better. It's not related to CDs, basically criticizing the leadership of such a regime in any fora. Now, are you not opening the Pandora's box here? I mean, if the United States say, well, this regime is illegitimate by our own standards, therefore any fora that is led by this regime will be boycotted by us, and we will ask our allies to do the same. Why, if other countries, being China, Russia, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, or anything, decide to start doing the same? I mean, is it not destruction of the multilateral system put in place by the United States in 1945? I'm a bit worrying about your own system there.
I think what we should be worried about with regard to the multilateral system is having countries such as Venezuela, Syria, Iran, presiding over leadership positions in the multilateral system. I mean, Syria couldn't be a more clear example here in the CD, where you had a country that used chemical weapons repeatedly against its own people, presiding over a body that negotiated the Chemical Weapons Convention. So I think these types of leadership positions that are held by malign actors basically are what's fundamentally undermining the international system. It's not countries on principle walking out of multilateral fora where you have these countries presiding over these bodies. That's not what is wrecking the international system. It's when you have these serial malign actors that have undercut fundamental norms, whether they be chemical weapons use, human rights, you name it. That's the long-term threat to the multilateral system. And this is something that my delegation and I tried to draw attention to during the subsidiary body discussions earlier this year that were in essence blocked by a group of malign actor countries because they were fearful of having a discussion about our rules of procedure. And I think they were quite fearful when I raised the issue of, let's talk about the CD presidency. Is it too short? Is it too long? Should there be criteria for holding the CD presidency? And these malign actors, I didn't mention all of them, but the ones that I did mention, they were very concerned about that kind of a discussion because they were fearful, and rightly so, that there could be a move in the international community to try to maybe establish some basic criteria dealing in terms of presiding in leadership positions. So we're very happy to have that discussion and not fearful of it, and don't think in any way we're undermining the multilateral system. What we're trying to do is preserve the multilateral system and not allow it to be infected by what we have is this this growing, unfortunately, a growing trend toward just turning the other way when malign actors are planning to accede to leadership positions in multilateral fora.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was wondering whether the presidency of Venezuela will have a sort of negative impact on the actual work of the Conference on Disarmament especially since the conference on disarmament hasn't had a proper working agenda for the last 20 years or so. So isn't that just another routine presidency that will go away after 4 weeks? And that's why I'm wondering why it's probably a little bit too much of a fuss about the whole thing. Thanks.
Thank you. First and foremost, with Venezuela, it's not a routine presidency for the reasons that I outlined. I think one of the most disappointing things about this year's CD session is that we were unable to reestablish the subsidiary bodies for this year. And again, the sole reason why we were unable to do this was because the British had a draft proposal with something in it that we fully supported, which would have allowed for the appointment of, I forget the terminology, a special coordinator to look into working methods of the CD and membership, seeing if there was a need to see how we could accommodate growing requests for membership in the CD. And at that point, when we were unable to do that, just because of the fear of this gang of countries that refused to have a discussion about, what potentially, what type of criteria might we look at with regard to future CD presidencies. That to me was another sad moment for this body. So I think it's quite clear, given what we know about Venezuela's plans for their presidency, that they're just going through the motions, again, trying to paint the regime as just undertaking a normal routine presidency. So the bigger question about what this leads to with regard to the future of the CD is troubling. But again, I view that from the perspective of another malign actor presiding over the body and tarnishing its image, tarnishing the body's image further. And I think this is something we've got to try as a community to figure out a way to deal with. But allowing a country like Venezuela or Syria to preside over an international body like this, a leadership position in the international body, is something we should not sit back and allow to happen. What will come out of this presidency? Very simply, nothing. It will be any document that is produced will not be legitimate because of the regime that put it forward.
Did you have a follow-up, Jan? Go ahead.
A follow-up, please. Given the track record of your administration when it comes to UN institutions and to UN treaties, are there any plans by your government to pull out of the CD altogether?
No, there are no plans to pull out of the CD. No.
Next, Gabriela, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Gabriela Sotomayor, Mexico. So what should be the criteria for choosing the president of the CD, in your view?
Thanks for the question. I don't have any specific criteria, but I do know that criteria that we should think about, and again, we wanted to have a discussion of this, is countries that are, for example, are not in compliance with their non-proliferation obligations is one such criteria. State sponsors of terrorism, from our view, countries that have long practiced terrorism. But again, we weren't looking to try to impose criteria. We wanted to have a discussion. And these countries feared even having a discussion of it. And that, to me, was, I think, quite puzzling, but also quite telling. When you look at the countries that were, in essence, raising their objections to it. There are other criteria that I'm sure we can sit down and think of, but again, we wanted to have that initial discussion. And countries, as I said, such as Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, some others did not want to have that discussion. So it's unfortunate, but we're going to continue to try to push to have that kind of a discussion because we think it's fundamental to this body. We cannot continue to allow malign actors such as Syria and Venezuela to assume these leadership positions without figuring out a way to prevent it from happening in the future.
Yeah, we'll go back over here.
Hi, Jeremy Lange, working for the French Public Radio. Talking about presidency, I was wondering, your Russian colleague, Mr. Gatilov, is seen as a potential successor for Mr. Mueller at the head of the UN headquarters. I was wondering if you have any comment on that.
No, first I've heard of this. No, I don't have any comment on that.
Thank you. I think we have time for just one more question. John, over here.
Yeah, I'd like to move the conversation a little bit and get your readout on the presidency that the U.S. presidency that just finished. Are you disappointed that despite the meetings by Secretary of State Pompeo with President Putin and Lavrov in Sochi, you can't get any traction to get the Chinese interested on a new initiative on nuclear disarmament at the highest levels?
Thanks for your question, John. No, we're not disappointed. I mean, we're in the early stages of trying to think through what type of an agreement we'd want to see go forward, what it should be included in that agreement. We have for quite some time tried to engage China in such a dialogue to talk about how we could bring them into some kind of a multilateral framework. We'll have to see how it goes. It's very early stages. We're giving thought to just what kind of a successor arms control agreement we might be able to reach, which countries we would like to see part of that. So this is something that we're looking at and will continue to look at, but I don't have any definitive answer for you at this point.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Great. Thank you very
Great,
much,
thanks everybody. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know it's been a busy morning for you. Thank you.